David is busy, so I will just start and the guys can keep coming on as they continue, as we continue. And Germa, I will just ask you please to just mute the guys so that we don't have any disturbances. But let me just put on my video so you guys can see me. I almost forgot. There we go. So good day, as I said, and a warm welcome to everyone that is joining us on this call today. As much as I would like to take credit for today's initiative, I must recognize that the idea was born from a farmer. You see, the South African farmer is a unique individual that is never satisfied with just surviving. Against all the odds, they still strive to thrive. This brings us to today's event. Today is all about positivity and growth. There are a few factors that determine the success of a great maize farmer. One of them is to start with the best. The P1197 platform from Pioneer has proven that it is the best start. Another equally important factor is farm management and good agronomical practices. Here, Mr. David Hula from the USA has proven that he is the best. Therefore, it only made sense to learn from the best. It is an absolute privilege to have the current maize world record holder, Mr. David Hula, signing in all the way from the US of A just to speak to us about his practices and what makes P1197 tick. Before we get started, just a few house rules. For the purpose and flow of this meeting, I would like to ask attendees to write their questions in the chat box below. Germa and Tareen will note them and they will be handled at the end of the meeting. If we run out of time, we will distribute David's response via email to all attendees. Also, please keep your speakers on mute as to not disrupt the sound clarity of the meeting. We prepared a few questions that was composed by our own South African farmers as to help with the direction and purpose of David's discussion. David, welcome again, and thanks for taking the time from your busy schedule to talk to us. We look forward to learning from you and how you achieved to break the world record with P1197 YHR.
Well, it's an honor to be there, at least virtually. I'm glad to be over here because, you know, it's like 32 degrees Celsius and we just had a little over 3 centimeters of rain last night. So things are going well. And we're kind of somewhat excited about our crop this year. We had some really neat things going on and we got into where we were in that 35 degrees Celsius range and lost a little bit of the cream off the crop because it was just a little bit hot. And I don't get worried about the heat during the day, but I'm mostly worried about the heat at nighttime. So it is an honor. First and foremost, it's an honor. And, you know, like he said, world record holder and the high yield corn. I want to preface 2 things. It's not just about me. First and foremost, we've surrounded ourselves with really good growers. We surround ourselves with a lot of industry, that from the Pioneer folks on the genetic side to the equipment side, whether it's John Deere or precision planting, and then the crop protection stuff, from BASF to Corteva to whatever herbicide program we use. And then probably one of the key components of it, well, there's 2 more. One is the fertility side, and that could be just from our N, P, and K. And then as we're getting into the biologicals, you know, we understand what it takes to raise the crop, but what are we doing to feed what's happening below ground? And as I travel across the United States and, you know, other parts of the country, other parts of the globe, I realize we all raise maize and maize is maize, whether it's here in the US or in South Africa or wherever. And it's all grown in a medium called soil. And once we can understand that, just because y'all are in South Africa, y'all have just as great opportunity if you can control your controllables. And so we've surrounded ourselves with a good team. I've done that. I got a chance to work with my late granddad and my dad. He's retired. He's 81 years old, but I still run ideas by him. But most importantly, y'all, we got to realize that it's only from the good Lord upstairs that we've had the success. And like I said, he gave us, you know, little over 3 centimeters of rain yesterday. Not any wind, just a little bit of lightning, but temperatures cool down at nighttime. So we have truly been blessed. And, you know, I'm just excited to be part of what's going on today, because that hybrid right behind me, P1197YHR, that is a hybrid that is going to be hard to beat. I know Corteva and Pioneer, they keep introducing new hybrids to us to try to out yield it. We haven't found one yet, but I know they're hard at it, and we got some looks at some new ones again this year, and a couple of them look very promising. So, Carl, there you go.
David, I must tell you something. You are touching my heart at this moment. I'm really glad to hear that you are doing so well with 1197 YHR. And yeah, it's a privilege. As we discussed, just to help with the structure of the meeting, I will ask the questions as composed by our farmers, and maybe just elaborate on what we normally do. And if you can just fill us in on what you do, and maybe just highlight what we need to focus on or change, taking into account our current practices, that would be great, David. So with that, I will move over to the questions that we have prepared or composed the farmers. The first question is in terms of cultivation practices. For a typical P1197 YHR competition field, what would your preparation and cultivation practices be? Also, what is your follow-up crop? Do you follow up on wheat, barley, oats, etc., or on a fallow field? What we normally do is we normally do double cropping with wheat as the main follow-up crop. And in terms of our field preparation, about 50% of the farmers do a strip till or no-till action in the wheat stubble, and 50% burn the wheat stubble, followed by a rip action and seedbed preparation before we get to planting our corn. So maybe if you can just elaborate on that.
Sure. Well, let me start out here in we're in Virginia. So I guess back in 1607 is where Captain John Smith came from England and settled. So we have some of the oldest continuously farmed ground from the Western civilization. Some of the acres that we tend has been farmed since 1609. So that's a long time. And we have truly come a long way from, you know, digging a hole, putting a fish in the ground, and 3 or 4 kernels of maize in the hole. So as a kid, you know, we would always plow, disc, and plant. And our rotation, and it's interesting that y'all double crop with wheat. What we do here is we'll plant maize, and then we'll harvest the maize. We plant, you know, calendar wise about the first part of April, and then we'll harvest it sometime before September's over. So from April to September, and then after we harvest the maize, we will plant no-till some cereals right into that, whether it's soft red winter wheat or hard red wheat or Durham wheat, or even some hard white wheat. And then we may also plant the barley, which is 6-row barley for feed, or we also raise some malt barley. And then the other crop cereal that we raise is some winter oats. And that's mostly for chopping, to where the customers, we raise the seed for other people to plant. We have a seed conditioning facility. And then we'll plant the cereals in October and then harvest them in June, and then we'll double crop that with soy. So we're able to get 3 crops in 2 years. So it'll be corn or maize, then cereals, then double crop soy, and then we go back into maize again. And as a kid, we used to plow, till the fields up, plow it, disc it, and then plant. And we would do that, you know, before our maize, we did it before our cereals, and we did it before a double crop soy, because we didn't have the herbicide programs that we do today. So now what we're currently doing is we transition from complete tillage to where we were no-tilling our maize and then no-tilling our soy, but we were still doing complete tillage for our cereal crop. And in 1986, we transitioned to where we stopped all tillage. We, in essence, became continuous no-till, or we like to quote it as being never till, to where we would plant the maize in no-till, then we harvest the maize. If we got the maize harvested before September 15th, the heat that we get and the moisture would allow the stalks to decay. After September 15th, because we're going to start planting the cereals October 1st, so that would be 15 days, we would spray like some nitrogen, some sulfur, or some sugar, just to help speed up the decomposition of the maize stalks. And then we would no-till the cereals in that residue. And then we would no-till the double crop soy. One of the things, like if y'all are into no-tilling behind corn stalks, one of the things that we did, for our cereal seeder, we have a John Deere air drill. We changed the gauge wheels. You know, the gauge wheels used to be about this wide, and then we went to the narrower gauge wheels where they're half the width. And what that did, that allowed us to have better depth control on our cereals, because the gauge wheel or the depth wheel was not running on so much residue or the corn stalks. Because imagine planting cereals into well, I'm going to use English terms because I don't know the metric conversion, but 3, 4, 5 plus 100 bushel corn. There's a lot of residue there that we have to contend with. So we need to make sure that we get that to decompose. And we've tried some biologicals as well, but nothing's better than using some fertilizer to break it down. And then because of our no-till, we also wanted to change components of our corn header. You know, when you buy, let's say you buy a John Deere corn header, the snapping rolls that pull the stalks down, they have their standard stalk rolls, or they have their knife stalk rolls, which cut the corn stalks into pieces. I think 6 years ago, we went and tried, there's a fellow by the name of Greg Sauter. He has what is called the 360 yield. And one of the things that aftermarkets that he has is it's called a stalk roller that breaks the residue and cuts it into segments this long, pieces of corn stalks like this. And that chain roll that they call it would also rip the corn stalks open. That allowed for the residue to start decomposing quicker. And in the last 2 years, this will be the third season, we've again changed our stalk rolls to what's now called the Marion Calmer, or the Calmer Super Choppers. And it's got 12, so that's 12 knives on the stalk roll, and it cuts the corn segments into little pieces of, we call them confetti, just real small pieces of corn residue, and that breaks it down really fast. Now, one of the difference between us here in the States and y'all in South Africa, after talking to some of the folks yesterday, we are able to harvest their corn while the stalk is still green. And we like to pick our corn when there's moisture in it so we can dry it. And in doing so, if you're able to harvest your crop while the crop is still green, but yet running 25 to 28% moisture, then that residue breaks down a lot faster because there's moisture in it. And I think that, I know it's a challenge for y'all because y'all need to store it in the silos and it's got to be dry, but having a corn dryer has been very beneficial to us so we can get the crop out timely. And then we can also get the second crop in. And then, you know, if I ever had to come up with one downfall 1197 is if you let it sit in the field extremely long, it has a tendency to want to lodge. Outside of that, I can't think of anything wrong with 1197 YHR. So, so kind of we've been into what's called no-till or continuous never-till. I say that, and then in the last 5 years, we have started playing with what's called strip tilling, where we work up a segment of soil about, I don't know, centimeters, about 8 inches wide, and then 3 inches deep. So it's like a segment this wide to where we're working up. It's got 3 no-till blades on it. We use what's called the ETS Soil Warrior. So if you Google, you can Google soil warrior, and that's a strip till machine. And what it does, it's got trash sweeps that move the residue out of the way. Then you have 3 no-till coulter blades, and we have to travel again. We go 6 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour. So whatever that is in kilometers. And that throws the soil up in the air. Then we blow fertilizer in that soil as it's suspended in the air. Then when it falls down, we run a rolling basket over top of it. And that allows us to put fertilizer down pre-plant, like nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, micronutrients. And in doing so, we don't have to worry about the burn on the roots because it's got too much salt index. So that is something we've played with, and we're doing more and more acres. We at Renwood Farms, we farm a little over 4,000 acres, and we'll have about 2,000 acres of corn every year. And then the other years we have cereal and soy, and we kind of rotate it. But I think that the transition is going to become more and more of this strip tilling because it allows us to be much more efficient with our fertilizer. So Carl, did I give you way too much to think about right there?
David, you touched on a lot of the questions that is still to come. So forgive me if I repeat myself, but
sure.
I think I don't only speak for myself when I say I can do with a repeat, and if we repeat, we learn. So thanks a lot for that, David. That was a mouthful, but definitely worthwhile. So for question number 2, we move to planting, and you already touched on a few of this, but this question is composed of a few sub questions, with the first being, do you have a preferred plant row direction and why? So we mostly plant 30-inch or 76 centimeter row widths, and the row direction is normally determined by the slope of the field to prevent runoff, or the main wind direction, as we struggle with lodging from time to time, the same as you, what you said. And some farmers plant in a circle because of the practicality of a pivot and cultivation practices. So that's what we normally do. Do you have a preferred row direction?
Okay, in reference to the row width, we also are 30 inches. We have played with narrow row, 15 inches. So that's half of it. We've played with what's called twin row, where it's got 2 rows every 30 inches. And the problem that we come across with going narrower than 30 inches is that we're trapping too much heat in. For us, we need the excess temperatures to get out of the corn as soon as possible in the evening. I'm not worried about the heat during the day. I'm more worried about how cool can we get it at nighttime. Now, Carl, I forgot to ask y'all, I'm assuming y'all's elevation is much higher than 40 feet above sea level. So we're just more tempered, and we just capture more heat. So when we went to narrow row, we had just a lot more heat holding inside the corn, to the point where it was roughly 9 degrees Fahrenheit at difference between the wide row versus the narrow row. Now, the other thing that you asked was row direction. That's intriguing because my dad and granddad spent a lifetime trying to make the rows as straight as we possibly could. And most of our soils are relatively flat. We have a few slopes, but not significant. A little bit where we have some erosion, but we're able to mitigate that with some, not terraces, but some waterways. Now, we have one field that is truly east and west. And then my landowner, we didn't own that particular field. He wanted to create some kind of, we call them duck impoundments. They like to duck hunt in the wintertime, and they flood it with water, and then they leave some corn out there. But we had that field going east and west, but on the middle of the field, we had to plant some rows north and south. So they were true east, west, and then north and south. And it was enough to where we could actually do some checking. And it was a great observation in that we were picking up 9 bushels more going east and west versus north and south. And the idea is because the sunlight, raising corn is nothing but numbers. You know, when you take the corn to the granary, what are they paying you for? They pay you for pounds or kilograms, or they're paying you for some kind of unit. It's not what the corn looks like. They don't pay you for how many bushels per acre you harvested or tons per hectare. They're paying you on tons or kilograms or pounds. And then we just got to figure out how to influence that. And that's something that, you know, we'll talk about that for the next hour or so. And going east and west for us gave us 9 more bushels. Now, have we changed that on all our operation? No. We're still planting the longest rows we possibly can, because more than likely the road direction is not what is their limiting factor. It's usually either temperature, some kind of management, a wind event, rainfall, because 27% of our acres is irrigated. That leaves 73% of our acres is dry land. And we're dependent on the good Lord to give us the rain that we so covet. And sometimes we pray diligently and we get the rain, and sometimes we pray diligently and we don't get the rain. So it all depends on the season. So east and west for us. Now, I don't farm in South Africa, so I don't know if that's the same. But if I had the perfect field that I would want, would be east and west with a south slope. Now, it might be best for y'all to go east and west with a north slope. And that way, we're just trying to capture as much solar radiation or sunlight going down that row as possible. And, you know, we've done a lot of things, but to try to mitigate that, but that seems to be the best for us. And then planting in a circle, I just get dizzy. I couldn't do that, Carl. So, did I hit your question there?
David, you definitely hit it, and I think the nighttime temperatures definitely plays a part here as well. I don't want to go in too deep about our height above sea level, as it varies a bit, and I'm afraid I will answer wrong there. So, but definitely that nighttime temperatures, I think that's a problem for us as well. So to move on to the next sub question, it is, what is your preferred depth for seed placement, and also what soil temperatures do you normally plant at? So our planting depth varies normally between 5 to 7 centimeters deep, or 2 to 2.8 inches. And most of our plantings takes place in December with a soil temperature of around 20 degrees Celsius. It's the summertime with us.
So I got to do some conversion. 20 degrees Celsius is, I don't know what temperature that is. Let's see here. We'll do 20. Done. Well, for me, first and foremost, I plant 2 inches deep. Now, to me, the key is, and let me back up. The most important thing a grower can do is plant his corn. Now, I want y'all really need to hear this. Plant your corn and get all the kernels, all the maize to come up at the same time. And when I say come up at the same time, is to be as most uniform as possible. And the way a grower can test this, and this would be a great exercise for everybody in the room, because y'all are on the call. When you plant your maize, it takes, I'm going to guess, roughly 5, 7, 10 days to come up out of the ground. Nod your head yes or no, Carl. Yep. Okay. So let's say it takes 7 days from the day you plant your corn to where you see the first spikelet. And what I want y'all to do now is called a flagging test. We want to evaluate the emergence. We want to make sure every kernel comes up in the same time as proximity. So go out there just before the corn starts spiking up, and then you want to look to where, let's see here, this ink pen, to where you got just a little bit of your corn coming out of the ground, just spiking out of the ground. And for example, for us, if we're planting 32,000 plants per acre, we want to measure 1/1000th of an acre. So Carl, I don't know what that is in y'all's metric system, but it's 17.5 feet for us. 1 30-inch row, 17.5 feet is 1/1000th of an acre. So find out whatever measurement that is, and then you go 7 days after you planted corn, and you find that first spikelet out of the ground. And if you're planting 32,000, take 32 survey flags, the same color. So we'll say red survey flags. And every place you see a survey, every place you see a kernel spiking out of the ground, and I'm saying spiking, you know, really small, stick a survey flag there, right next to it. Do that at 7 o'clock, and then come back at 7 o'clock, 12 hours later, and do the same thing. You want to find all the kernels that have spiked out of the ground, and then you'll take a different color flag. So if you started out with a red one, let's say you went out there and when they first spiked out of the ground, you found 12 kernels spiking. Then you write down and you take a piece of paper and you write down day 1 in the morning, red flags, 12 spikelets. And then come back 12 hours later and then look again for those real small spikelets and take like a white flag or just a different color flag and put that flag next to each one of those spikelets. And then on your piece of paper, you write down how many spikelets you had, and keep doing that 12 hours in increments. What that's going to show you is what the ears look like, the differences. Wait all the way till harvest, leave the flags there. And then just before you harvest, go out there and take, if you found where you needed 6 different color flags, it took you 3 days for all those kernels to come up, then take 6 different 5-gallon buckets and then put all the red flags in one bucket, all the white flags in another bucket, blue flags, yellow, or whatever color flags you have, and then weigh each one of those. But also look at the ears, and you'll notice that the ears that come up first are going to be your ears that are going to give you the most bushels. The ears that come up later are going to be those that are smaller around, less kernels on them. And for a grower, that shows them how important it is to get your corn to come up at the same time. If you really want to do something, do that on every row of your corn planter. Then you'll understand that each row does something a little different. It may be wheel tracks. It may be residue. It may be that your fertilizer on your planter is not putting out right. or it may be that your depth isn't right. So I make sure every row is planting 2 inches deep. And then we do all that we can to make sure that that corn comes up uniformly. That is probably the single most important thing a grower can do. And then because when that planter leaves the field, you cannot fix any problems. It's done. You got to live with it the rest of the season, or unless you want to spray it, kill it, disc it, start all over. Now, in reference to the temperatures, I do not like to plant when temperatures are cold. We're going to plant when things are warm, and we won't plant until things are, wait a minute, you said y'all plant at 20 degrees Celsius. Was that correct?
Yes, that's about 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay. Oh, so you're planting when it's plenty warm. We plant when it's colder than that. We'll plant when it's about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when we'll start, because I got to get our season in. And we like to wait when the trend is warmer, when temperatures are going up. If the temperatures go up and then go down, we'll stop the planters. But y'all clearly are planting in a much warmer environment than I am. So the thing that we like to do when we're planting our corn earlier is we try to make sure we got the right amount of fertilizer out there, and we move the residue so the corn can come up as quickly as possible. So I think I hit the two talking points you wanted to know. 2 inches deep. If you're going to plant or if you're going to plant 2.5 or 2 1/4, or just make sure all the rows are the same, and then make sure that you try to do everything you can to get all the kernels to come up at the same time. I like the fact that y'all will wait until things are a lot warmer. I would have guessed that y'all would have started earlier, but you have a reason for what y'all do. Y'all farm in South Africa, I don't.
So David, what I get from it, we have some early maize plantings, but that is the exception because we normally do the double cropping and we don't have open fields. But what I get from this is the most important factor is actually not the temperature, it's more uniformity and even a timely emergence. But I think it's still a good baseline to know that your minimum temperature will be 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's something that we can take away from this and learn from, especially for our early plantings. But I think planting depth and things like that is more important for the uniformity of emergence.
Yeah, getting that corn to come up uniform is by far the most important thing a grower can do, irregardless of fertilizer. If I can get my corn to come up uniform, and when I say uniform, I want growers to understand this. If you can get all your corn to come up within 12 hours, now that's not GDUs, we're talking hours, because you'll eventually, once you start understanding what I'm talking about, you'll start converting that from hours to GDUs. And when you can get your corn to come up for that 1197 YHR that we've had good success with the last couple of years, all our maize was coming up within 10 to 11 GDUs. That's the entire area. That's not even 12 hours. So if you can do that, that will be the single most important thing a grower can do. Because when you do that, now all your plants are growing the same, and all the ears will be the same height. It's growing like one big crop. So that's when I know I have some opportunity to do something well. All right, Mr. Carl.
A successful season needs a good start. Definitely, I agree with you. So we move on still at the planting. What is your optimum population? And does it vary between sandy soils and clay soils? Yep. So we have for a population of about 95,000 plants per hectare or 38,000 plants per acre. in your terms. Our main soil type in a broad spectrum is sandy loam soils with almost no organic matter and a clay percentage of around, say, 12%. Our soil depth varies from field to field, but a maximum of 50 centimeters or 20 inches are used for cultivation practices.
Okay. Populations, like I said, that our 73% of our acres is dry land. Now, our soil types go from sandy loam to, which is you say low organic matter. I would agree, to where we're like 1.1% organic matter. I don't focus as much on organic matter. We like to focus more on what's cation exchange capacity, or CEC. That helps us understand the fertility side better. And if y'all are not from, I don't know if y'all use that as a yardstick or not, but our CECs range from 2.1 to 6.7. Now, when you get out in the Midwest, where the corn is known to be grown here in the States, they'll have that CEC up to 30%, up to 30. And that just means a lot more heavier soil, a lot more water holding capacity, because if we don't get rain, we're 7 to 10 days from starting to wilting on their crop, because we cannot hold our moisture. Now, irrigated acres, we would plant our populations thicker. So for our dryland acres, if depending on the CEC, we drop our corn as low as 22,000 plants per acre. And then for irrigated, we've gone as high as, well, I've tried 60,000. That's a little bit high. So most of it's going to be in that 44 to 50,000. Now, not all the field, it's just segments of the field, because we have to spread risk out. We don't know if we're going to get a wind event. We don't know if we're going to get a hurricane. So we have to watch out for those. So we want to mitigate some risk. And then too, if we plant it all too thick and then for some reason the irrigator breaks down, then we're hurting ourselves. So we just plant segments of the field at different populations. But like I said, we go to 22,000 is their low. On our heavier dryland soil, we'll go as much as similar to what y'all say, 36,000. You said 38. And then on irrigated, our minimum is going to be 36, and the max is usually around 50,000 per acre. And most of our soils are what we call fine sandy loams, but we do have the sands, and then we do have a little bit of clay. Not very similar to what I think y'all have. But so do y'all use that barometer of cation exchange capacity, Carl, or is it just organic matter?
David, we use it in some instances, but if I must be honest, and I'm speaking for myself here, that the organic matter material in some cases in our area is there's basically just traces of it. There's nothing. Right? So we try. I think we started with our cultivation practices. Now we only started now to be building up our organic matter material.
Yeah, we cannot build our organic matter either, because the residue decays so fast. If we were to harvest our maize and then we plant our cereals out there, by the time we plant the soy, our maize is gone. The only thing left would be maybe the corn, the ear, the cob, the corn cob, and then maybe a little bit of the root ball, but the rest of it's all gone, just because of partially is because of our temperatures and moisture, but then the other thing is all the biology that we have below ground that we've been trying to incorporate and feed. So, all right, I feel we've addressed part C. So we got a long way to go, Carl.
To go, yeah. The next question, I think you already touched on quite a bit, and it was, when it comes to planter alterations, what accessory parts are most important for you? So most of our farmers use a traditional air seeding planter to plant their corn with some small alterations in terms of seedbed preparation. What do you use and what accessory do you focus on mainly?
Okay, that's a good question, because that is probably when I go talk with growers, the first thing they want to talk about is steel. You know, what can they do to their planter? They don't I'm telling them that having corn come up uniformly is so important. What can they do? Well, the first thing that they got to do is they got to understand what they're doing. I'm not sure if precision planting is a component over there, but we use a lot of precision. We have John Deere planters, but they're all equipped with precision planting components. So the first thing a grower, I think, is important is get the monitor, because so now you have this monitor in the cab, and all it's doing is recording information. So you put sensors on the planter to record how much down pressure you use, what the ride is like. Then you can put what's called smart firmers, which reads the temperature, where the seed's being placed. It reads the moisture, it reads the residue, it reads organic matter. So once you collect all that information, then you got to decide, well, what am I going to do? So this is a procedure in which we did. We started out with the monitor. Then we realized the next thing we thought was important was to get that picket row fenced in, where you got, plants all evenly spaced. So we like to say we chased that rabbit down the hole. We put that on the planter, and we got that picket row fenced in to where everything was spaced properly. Then the next thing that we did was put on what's called the delta force, or the hydraulic down pressure. I remember as a kid, and then, before, well, not as a kid, but even within the last 25, 30 years, we just had springs as down pressure. Well, that gave the planter unit was bouncing across the field. So we put the hydraulic down force on, and that smoothed the ride out where the unit was going across. I like to oftentimes think that there was a guy in Iowa that was the first one to break 400 bushel corn, and his name was Francis Childs. And he didn't have all the tools that we had. This was back in the 80s and early 90s. He took a Coke bottle or Pepsi can or pop, whatever y'all call it, and set it on top of the hopper top. And as he was planting corn, if the Coke bottle fell off, then he knew he was going too fast, so he'd have to slow down. So he was ahead of his time in the fact that if he could keep the planter from bouncing, then he knew he was getting that depth that he wanted. So just quickly, the monitor to identify what your problems are. Then number two would be, I wouldn't worry about the picket row fence stand. Number two would be my delta force, or the hydraulic down pressure. Then number three would be my closing system. I want to make sure that my closing system is center of the row, and that it's doing the best job it possibly could. And then number four would be the meter to give you that picket row fence stand. Because I understand if you get two plants that are closer together versus two that are wider apart, if they come up the same time, it doesn't matter. But if they don't come up at the same time, the two that are close together are not going to do very well versus the ones that are further apart. So get them up at the same time. Then attachments after that is, and I think we'll talk about fertility, but on our corn planter, we also put our fertilizer about this far from the corn row, and we call that starter, on both sides. So we have, in essence, our fertilizer is 3 inches to the left of the seed row and 3 inches to the right of the seed row. And on one side, it's 2 inches below the seed. So it's what we call 3 by 2 by 2. So it's 3 inches to the side, 2 inches below the seed. And then on the other side, it's 3 inches beside the row and only 1 inch deep. And we're doing that with the product called Conceal. And I know that's another precision planting component. The goal is we want to have corn. If I don't know if I can draw this real quick. So if this is their corn seed, we got fertilizer down here, and then we have fertilizer right here. And what we're doing there is we know roots. We know roots are going to grow down. So we want the roots to capture this fertilizer, and then we want the roots to capture this as the plant's growing up. So I know that was quick and looked like my grandson drew that. But the idea is, as the roots are growing down, we want the fertilizer to capture it, as opposed to putting fertilizer with the seed. I do not put any fertilizer right here. The only thing we'll add there is zinc. I do not put any nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, sulfur. The only thing we'll put in with the seed is zinc, because we know the zinc is going to feed the biology of the plant and below ground. So in essence, that's kind of some of the things we've done to the planter. Now, we also run that Soil Warrior to do a better job with the seed preparation, the seed bed preparation. And then that's where we can put a lot of our fertilizer. But beyond that, there's other things you can do, but until a grower really is pushing the envelope, I don't know that we need to spend a whole lot of time on that, Mr. Carl.
I agree, David. Currently, I think most of our planters only put the fertilizer to one side. So we don't have both sides.
Right.
But I definitely think that the guys can take something away from your discussion now and make some alterations on the planter with the thoughts that you shared now. So that moves us to the next question. And that's more on agronomical methods and practices. And I think we covered this also, or you mentioned a few tips on this already, but what do you do to combat lodging? So a small number of farmers in our area started to experiment with chemical growth regulators like Etherpon, and we also focus on in-row spacing for maximum root development, but this has a limiting effect on our high population plantings. So that creates problems in that sense, but if you can just give us a few tips with regards to lodging.
Okay, lodging is a big problem. It's a concern for me as well. As we push our populations or plant it thicker, then we're subject to more wind events to where we lodging. The way in which we mitigate lodging is, one, we make sure we have adequate amount of potassium in the soil and in the plant. We pull a lot of potassium, we pull a lot of leaf tissue samples to the point where we're pulling samples every week. Every Monday morning, we'll pull a sample, send it to the lab so we can make any adjustments in season. And we can do that either with the applicator or we'll do it with the irrigation, fertigate. So that's one way. In reference to growth regulators, we use a lot of pgrs. Are we able to, I'm not able to shorten the plant, but we are able to have for a better root system and then for bigger stalk diameter. We're able to influence those. And then the other thing is we're big on keeping the plant healthy and green. So we use a lot of fungicides to mitigate ethylene production and to allow that leaf to put as much energy into the kernel set as possible. The only downside is if as you wait and harvest later and later, as the crop matures, then you're subject to that wind event to where the corn could lodge on you. Our biggest issue is sometimes we get the green snap or brittle, and yeah, that's just a huge wind event. And I don't have an answer for how to stop that, because one hybrid like 1197 YHR may be resistant to it this year, and then next year we get that wind event at a different time. And so the struggles are, watch your population, don't plant it too thick. 1197 has a great opportunity to get a bigger ear around, and it's got some flex to it, so it can respond to lower populations. And then the other thing is keep the plant healthy. But we focus a lot on potassium, and then I'm not sure what your nutrient levels are, but you know, there's potassium and calcium ratios that we like to focus on, and then keeping the plant healthy. So that's the best thing I can tell you, Mr. Carl. And I wish Corteva had something to shorten the plant up that they could spray.
I agree. There's no foolproof.
Okay.
Yeah, for lodging. If there was, we would be rich. So I think we touched on the next question a bit. I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to elaborate. The question was, is disease pressure a concern for you, and what do you do to reduce it? So we normally apply 2 chemical fungicides throughout the season. The first spray is at around 6 to 8 leaves stage, and the second spray is normally after pollination has taken place. And the first spray, I know this because I come from the chemical side. We normally use we focus on the strobies, and we normally use a product that reduces ethylene production, and that helps to keep the plant green in effect, and green and healthy. And I think we are already on the right track with that. But do you also just use two sprays of your strobies, or what is your
Sure.
disease pressure? Yeah.
Okay, well, we do have a lot of disease pressure. I don't have much corn after corn, so some of those, like gray leaf spot, is not as big a deal for us. But we get the blights, we get some rust, anthracnose is big, and maybe gray leaf spot might be coming in. So we first start off with a good seed treatment. Corteva Pioneer's got a great seed treatment package. Then we also add in furrow fungicide. We like to put some fungicide in furrow because we get what's called dampen off, or pythium. So we got to combat that. Then, very similar to what y'all say, at that V5, V6 stage, we will address it then. We'll make a fungicide application, similar, like you talk about the strobies. What we then later do is we're going to be 2 more at a minimum after that. When the corn gets to that V10, V12 stage, the last time our ground applicator can get across the field without doing damage, we'll make another fungicide spray. And the reason being is the ear leaf is out then. And if we can, and we know we're going to get good coverage because we're using a ground applicator, and we know that that leaf is higher up the canopy, and we want to make sure we protect that, because that's the most important leaf you got, and protecting it is key. Then, so that's at V, so we're doing a V5 spray. Then we do again V10 or V12. We like to wait as long as we can. And then we'll come back at R1, wait till, or R1, R2, depending on number 1, pressure, if we got disease pressure, and then what the environment's been like. If we've been cloudy, a lot of moisture, we know we need to. If we've been hot and drier and the only water is from our irrigators, then we may kick it all the way to brown silk and then get by with 1 spray after pollination. If, like our irrigated acres that we're really pushing, will be V5, V10 or 12, R1, and then again, about 2.5, 3 weeks after R1, to where we'll make that fourth and final spray because of our late season anthracnose. And y'all, we're really trying to make these kernels heavier. Now, I didn't ask Mr. Carl what test weight is. How much does the 1197 weigh for per bushel or whatever? But for us, our 1197 runs 5 to 10% heavier than my neighbors, because we're keeping that plant green, healthy, and that kernel, we're getting it to where the kernel's almost not even dented. We're keeping that kernel plump, rounded, and full of starch. So I think I hit it. I think I hit your fungicide question there, Carl.
You definitely did, David. Thanks for that. So we normally, it's our pip weight, if I can call it that, in my broken English, is around 0.35 grams or 0.4 grams. If we are lucky on the average, the better yielding fields. So I think we definitely have a bit of work to do there. I think what you create with that extra space is just a healthier plant that can fill its pips much better. Yeah. So David, that brings me to my next question, and basically, yeah, this is also $1 million question, but how do you manage 2 contributing ears per plant on 1197 YHR? So our plants sometimes initiate the second ear, but rarely fills the second one.
Yeah. Carl, I wish I had the answer for that. It's kind of like the growth regulator, keeping the plant short. The key is, 1197 does a couple things. First and foremost, it oftentimes puts on those suckers or tillers or stools. I'm not sure what we like to call them, the secondary plants. That's a function of sunlight and temperatures. And when the corn is, depending on what nodal root that sucker comes from, depends on what the environmental conditions are. But the second ears, as we all know, a corn plant can put on significantly more than one ear. It's just we've struggled to even get it to come out or to keep it. Now, 2 years ago, 47% of our plants had harvestable ears, those suckers. Now, whenever we're able to capture and get some of those second ears, is sunlight. We've had a lot of sunlight, and then through our plant tissue samples, we've been able to make sure that our nutritional levels are, I don't want to say excessive because that wastes money, but they're above average. The plant's been well fed. It has the fertility, it has the moisture. Now, when you plant it really thick, oftentimes those second ears just don't even do anything. Now, in 2019, we were able to keep those second ears, and we were able to harvest 200 to 500 kernels on some of those. And that was a function of the sunlight. We just had copious amounts of sunlight. And then the other thing that we had was their temperatures were not in excess. Our nighttime temperatures were cooler. Our daytime temperatures were mostly average or below average. And when you can get your grain fill period time to last as long as possible, now you're able to put more kernels on. This year, we were able to set a lot of second ears, but we had some excessive heat 2 weeks ago, and most of those second ears have come off on one farm. Now, I still got to go check another one because it was planted much later, and we've gotten a lot cooler. So we're hoping we're able to keep them. So sunlight, number one. Number two, moisture and fertility. You got to have the fertility there. And Carl, you mentioned PGRs. That's ever so key. Low dosage multiple times will allow, because it's either working on the roots, the shoots, the reproductive, or the pollination portion of it. And then you get into the grain fill. So we do a lot of low rates multiple times. And whether it's through the irrigation, through the ground applicator, or through any aerial, airplane or helicopter sprays. So I don't have a quick answer. I get asked that probably about every time I give a talk. How can you keep those second ears? And it's it's some things that you can't control, but then you got to be able to make sure you control all that you can. So when the weather's right, it can respond. So good luck on that, Carl.
Again, not an easy answer. I think it's a consequence of perfect circumstances, not only by you, but also by nature. And yeah, and everything adds up to that second year going up then.
So just keep, if you plant it in a thinner population, you can clearly see that. And an observation for a grower is look on the outside of your cornfields. Most of your corn rows on the outside have 2 ears on them, right? I'm going to assume so, because it's everywhere here in the United States. And what happens out there that doesn't happen in the center is capture more sunlight. So that to me is a great indication of how to keep it. And we got to figure out how to do that. Sunlight in a jug would be good.
Okay, David. So the next question is, in your opinion, what is the most critical growth stages where stress should be avoided for a competition cornfield? With the new ultra-quick cultivars, we have experienced sensitivity for stress and environmental conditions as the plants move really quickly through their growth stages. And what would you say, what is the most critical stages for any stress?
Okay, well, irregardless whether it's competition corn or regular maize, when can you influence how many pounds of maize you get, or grams, or tons, or so there's three ways in which you can influence yield. One is the total number of kernels on the ear, and how can you influence that, and then the weight of the kernels. So the total number of kernels is, you got the ear that's girthy around, so how many rows around, and then how long are those ears. So let's think about when is the girth of the ear determined? When do they determine how many rows around? And you pull the ear and you see 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. I said I'd never seen any 24 rows around, but a farmer sent me some because he clearly has them. So when is that determined? If you talk to a lot of the university people, or we call them academic folks, they say it happens between V5 and V7. Well, there was an agronomist, Sandy Edicott with Pioneer. I spent some time with her, and we spent a lot of time talking about this. And I said, I don't believe it happens between V5 and V7. I think it happens much earlier. And because when you pull that ear, isn't it always an even number of rows around? It's either 14, 18, 20, 22. It's never 13 or 15 or 19. So the reason it's even is because there's that one row splits. Well, I agree with the university folks. It happens between V5 and V7. That's when it's actually splitting. But I want to know when the number of rows, the initial number of rows are set. And on earlier hybrids, those that are 90 CRMs or earlier, probably happens closer to V3. And then when we get to the later hybrids, the 110 to 120 CRMs, it happens, I feel, between V3 and V4 prior to V5. So the goal is you got to get that kernel, you got to have that plant healthy then. You want it happy. Now at V3, it's still living off the seed. So it's not much that we can do, but y'all waiting to plant when conditions are warmer, that's a bonus. Then when you get to later on at that V5, when it's getting ready to split, you got to be careful not to spray any herbicides, because if you spray herbicides late without direct banding them, the plant's got to metabolize it. It goes through a stress. I don't know if you've ever seen an ear that's 18 rows around and then it pinches down to 14 before it gets to the tip. More than likely, that's because you had some herbicide application or you had some significant weather event. But most likely it's because the grower made a herbicide spray. So influencing the girth. The next is influencing the length. There was another pioneer agronomist named Jeff Schlussler. He gave me an idea. He said, David, if you were to put 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, y'all got to do the math, 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen in a concentrated form, it would allow you to capture more length, because the ear, that 100 pounds is going to trick the plant to think that it wasn't as densely populated. So we did that. I got a really good story. I don't want to spend much time telling it because I want to answer some questions. But in doing that 100 pounds, 7 to 10 days before tassel, we picked up 4 kernels long, 4 more kernels per ear. Well, that is significant, particularly when you start planting higher populations. So now we've made the ear bigger around, we've lengthened it out, and then the last thing is on test weight. As you are wanting to focus on higher yields, you got to make sure your plant is not fending off disease and not running through some kind of stress, so it can make the kernel weight heavier. And in doing so, irrigation, fungicides late, so that whole green leaf can put all the energy it can into that kernel set. So those are the 3 ways, Carl. Early prior to V5 rows around, and some of that's temperatures, but you got to have fertility. Then excessive, not excessive, but good fertility, 7-10 days before tassel. And then let's not let the plant go into any stress when it's trying to fill out those kernels. All right.
Thanks, David. That makes a lot of sense. We were discussing it here. I'm sitting with one of my agents or dealers, and we discussed it. We totally agree with you that the potential of a maize plant is determined really quickly in its growth stages, and that's where we really have to give our utmost attention to it. You already touched on the next question. So the next question is, in an ideal world, what would your preferred climatic conditions be? So we tend to have the highest yields in a warm, dry year with a lot of heat units. But I think you answered it when you said sunlight in a jug. And that is the main thing. But if you can elaborate just a bit more, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, briefly, get the crop, have good warm conditions, not excessively wet early, so you can get good root development. And then, sunlight throughout the season. We have our highest yields when we're typically have premier sunlight, almost to where we're drier on a dry land. And then during grain fill, we want it as cool as possible. The longer grain fill period, the more energy, the heavier the kernels can be. And so for areas that have high elevation above sea level, their temperatures cool down at night. That is ideal. And I don't have that, but so we depend on what the good Lord gives us. And then we try to irrigate to help cool the crop down, but we can't really influence the temperature other than good moisture in the soil. The plant itself will cool itself down. So, yes, sir.
Thanks, David. Our next question, question number 4. We touched on this, and I think it's a touchy subject. A lot of farmers have their own ideas here. It's concerning fertilizer. So what fertilizer do you plant with? What is your NPK totals at planting? Just to say, we normally, and yeah, normally this is my normal, but we normally use a granular fertilizer for planting, consisting of about 212 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare, or 188 pounds per acre. Our phosphate is around 55 kilograms per hectare or 49 pounds per acre. And our potassium is around 75 kilograms per hectare or 66 pounds per acre at planting. We also focus on sulfur in the form of ammonium sulfate with planting.
Okay. Yeah, this is something growers really like to talk about, and because this is what they can control for the most part. So I'm just going to throw some numbers out, and this is we pull soil samples. We pull soil samples on every acre. So we grid samples on every acre. So I don't. That's like what, a half a hectare or something. So imagine pulling soil samples like that, and then we variably rate lime. You know, we have to lime our soil, and we will use a ton of dolomitic lime every 2 to 3 years. So we can, their pH, I want my pH to be about 6.3, and a ton of lime will raise it up a half a point. And so if we get down to 5.9, we'll put a ton of lime down, and then we'll get it to 6.3, 6.4. With their soil warrior or without our soil warrior, we're going to put NPK, sulfur, and zinc, and then any other micronutrients that we feel are necessary. That's based off our tissue samples from the previous years. It's not based off the soil sample, it's based off our tissue samples. Because even if you have it in the soil, if the plant's not able to find it, it's not doing you any good, because soil can tie up some nutrients. So I'm just going to give you American units, and then y'all got to convert them. But we put roughly 200 pounds of MAP, and that's the 1152O. And then we'll put as much as 300 pounds of muriated potash. That's 0060. So that would be roughly 180 pounds of potash. And then we also use, you mentioned ammonium sulfate. We'll use ammonium sulfate. We'll put roughly 100 pounds of that out. And now all this is with the strip till rig, the soil warrior. And then we'll add some zinc accordingly. It's going to get zinc. And, you know, depending on where I get my best price at, it's usually a zinc sulfate. And we'll put roughly 3 elemental pounds of zinc out. Not a whole lot, but just enough to feed feed the soil. Then with their planter, now this is that strip till rig rate that may change according to our soil samples, but then with their planter, the starter that is, you know, the starter that's going right here or right here and here, we're going to have 66 pounds of nitrogen. We're going to have 33 pounds of phosphate. We're going to have a half to 1 pound of boron. Now again, let's be clear. We're putting it here and here. We're not putting it with the seed, not at all. This is sideways beside it. Then we'll add a half a pound of zinc. And then let's see, I don't know if I said sulfur, 6 pounds of sulfur. So 66 pounds of nitrogen, 33 pounds of phosphate, 6 pounds of sulfur, a half to 1 pound of boron, and a half a pound of zinc. That's on every acre we plant. Then in season, we start based on our yield goal, how much nitrogen we're going to side dress. We'll side dress somewhere between that V5 and V7 stage. And on irrigated acres, that could be 150 pounds. On dryland acres, that could be 50 pounds. But you heard me say about trying to make the ear longer, so we will put another 100 pounds at V10 to V12, the last time the sprayer can get across the field, or we'll irrigate it. And then we add nitrogen, potash, during that application as well. And that could be as much as another 100 to 150 pounds. And then we irrigate the rest. We understand that it takes for us 1.1 pound of nitrogen per bushel of yield goal. So you got to do the math. So we're going to fertilize for that. So if we're going for 300 bushels, 400 bushels, or 500 bushels, we're going to make sure we fertilize for that. And then I don't know y'all's soil, so y'all may have a lot of potash in your soil. We do not, because of their sandy nature, and it leaches. We're going to have at least 3/4 to 1 pound of potash per bushel of yield goal. And we know that corn loves potash. That helps us on the standability. Corn will take up more potassium than it actually needs. It's a luxury consumer of it, and it's going to help on your stalk strength. And then as the plant dies after we harvest, it releases that potassium back to their cereals and their soy crop. So we put more down then than normal. That's in a nutshell, Carl. I mean, we could go in a lot of depth over it, but for high yield and regular production, I kind of broke it out. So this is recorded, so y'all can go back and play it and revisit what I said.
Yeah, I think we got the magic recipe. So the guys, I think they're working hard. So now what I noticed, or I wanted to ask about it, was the potassium at the beginning, but I think you answered my question, and I don't want to elaborate too much because we don't have a lot of time left. On that subject, David, it's 5 minutes to past. Can we go a bit over?
Yeah, we're fine. Yeah, we can go.
Okay. So the guys that have to leave, they can leave, but we will go a bit over for this session. So you touched on a lot of it now with that discussion, but the next question from our farmers was, what does your foliar program look like? And how many repetitions, at what stages, and what is most critical for you? So we try to divide our foliar sprays at strategic times throughout the season and try to use the foliar sprays on deficiencies pointed out by the most recent leaf samples that has been taken on the field. What is your view on this?
Okay, yes. First and foremost, y'all clearly understand when I say the growth stages in which we can influence yield. So we want to have those leaf samples, and we want to have a history of those leaf samples, because after you've collected a history of them, you now know when the peak curve is and when it's getting ready to drop. So as it's dropping, all we want to do is lower that curve. It's still going to fall, to reduce the curve, the drop. So when the corn is at V3, when it's starting to photosynthesize, that's when we make our first foliar spray. It's only micronutrients, 0 NPK sulfur. It's only micronutrients like zinc, copper, manganese, iron, cobalt, boron, and moly. Molybdenum will be the last one. So we're doing that at V3, and the goal there is most of it's hitting the ground, but we're trying to get that plant stimulated, so because it's going to find the N, P, and K and sulfur, calcium and magnesium that it wants. We're just wanting to get it balanced so it can make that girth of that ear as big around as it can. We also add fairy dust like humic acids, and we'll also add pgrs at that time. Then foliar wise, we continue to pull our tissue samples, and we make sure that we're in front of whatever stage we're at. So it's hard for me to say, Carl, what is the best time, because without seeing what the grower is actually experiencing, I don't know where his uptakes are and what's going on. But V3 is number one. Then we like to hit the flag leaf as soon as we possibly, or the ear leaf rather, as soon as it's fully out. So we'll make a foliar spray then. And then we make 2 more big foliar sprays in season as we're tasseling and while we're grain filling. Clearly, we're making some other sprays based on what our leaf tissue samples are saying, and then based on history. If we know we're getting ready to drop certain nutrients. This is irregardless of foliar. Every time I apply nitrogen, you heard how many times I do nitrogen. I add nitrogen, I'm adding sulfur, and we're adding boron. Boron is the most mobile nutrient we got in the soil. It doesn't move well in the plant. So we're adding, every time we make a nitrogen spray, nitrogen, sulfur, and boron. And then when we get to where the uptake curve of nutrients is high, that's when we're adding a lot of potassium as well. I mentioned side dressing potassium, and then we fertigate potassium. So it's a tough one, Carl, because without knowing their levels, but V3, then when I'm making a herbicide spray, I never weed and feed. So it's after that, then at the ear leaf, and then twice when we're grain filling, we spend time on it.
Okay. The next question was with regards to micronutrients, what is most important for 1197 whitechar in your book, and at what growth stages? So we mainly focus on zinc, boron, manganese, copper, and iron, but this is also determined by leaf sampling. Is there something that you focus on or apply as a given? I think you already gave the answer in the form of boron is very important. And from my little knowledge here, boron acts, it carries the other elements as well, and it's very important for a good corn yield. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I agree with y'all. I mean, we do a lot of zinc. Clearly, you understood. I'm talking about zinc in furrow. We have zinc on our seed. I didn't even talk about that. And then, but boron. Every time we make an application, there's boron. But then the other nutrient that we'd like to focus a lot on, the other two, manganese is not a big deal for us. Copper's not big because of our some soils it is. But iron and molybdenum, they're two of the bigger ones for us. You know, the boron is helping the pollination. The moly is helping the plant work on fixing the nitrogen and getting it into the plant. And then the zinc, you know that. But then also the iron. We like iron to keep the plant dark green, and it helps on the photosynthesis part of it. So we're making multiple iron sprays. We even run iron through our pivots. I know it's going to make them turn rust color, but we want that leaf black green if we can get it. All right.
Yeah, I think that answers it. The last question you touched on a lot as well, but I think you gave the totals with planting with the total action. It's for a competition field. What would your NPK season totals be? So our total nitrogen for high yielding fields are normally around 420 kilograms per hectare or 370 pounds per acre. Phosphate is around 62 kilograms per hectare or 55 pounds per acre. And our potassium can be calculated at about 110 kilograms per hectare or 97 pounds per acre. We normally dissolve our in-season fertilizer and apply it with the irrigation water through the pivot as well.
Yeah. Well, we're making, clearly, you understand, I'm making multiple sprays. I mean, we could talk a half a day about the fertility side of it. And so we got to understand what my yield goal is. So if I got a 500 bushel yield goal, then I'm going to be 500 to 550 pounds of nitrogen. If I got a 300 bushel yield goal, I know we're wanting 1.1 pound per bushel. So I'm going to be that 300 to 330 pounds of nitrogen. My potash, just in a quick rule of thumb, it's 1 pound per bushel yield goal. We know we're not going to lose it because it's going to tie it up. Now, in reference to phosphate, we have a big, we have a watershed here that we have to be environmentally sensitive of. So we can't just put excess of nitrogen and we can't put excess of phosphorus. We're not having any erosion, so our phosphorus isn't leaving their fields. But for high yielding environments, we're going to be in that 110 to 120 pounds of P applied pre-plant, or with at some point in time. I don't do any phosphorus in season. We just have not had the great success. We need to make sure we have that up early. And so we'll apply that down with their strip till machine. And then we, like I mentioned, we have our starter. So in essence, that, 500 pounds nitrogen, I guess, if I'm going for a super high yield, 120 pounds of phosphate and close to 500 pounds of potash. And then for every 8 pounds of nitrogen, I want at least 1 pound of sulfur. So we're diligent about that. 8 to 1, or even as low as 6 to 1 on some of our sandier soils. So nitrogen to sulfur, 8 to 1 or 6 to 1 ratio.
Yeah, David, I want to thank you for this. I think it's a subject that can keep us busy for weeks. Yeah, and it depends on what you want to achieve, and it depends on the soil and the field that you are working with. But I think in a broad spectrum, the guys got something that they can take away, and everybody must make this work for their own circumstances on their own farms. My last question on my list is critical focuses or management practices. And here we just asked, is there something in your book that you specially implement for 1197 YHR competition field? We treat it as any other racehorse corn hybrid with a lot of focus on water scheduling. And yeah, we are looking for the golden bullet, if I can call it that. In terms of 1197, we are chasing your record, so you must watch out.
Okay. I hope y'all beat my record so I can learn something from y'all. So every time I work with growers, it's like I'm learning. I got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So the good Lord wants me to listen more than talk. So in reference to 1197, getting it off to a good start. We spend a lot of time with that seed. We treat it, we over-treat it, we put zinc on the seed, we're putting biology. So if I can get if I can get it up, like I talked about, all that corn to come up within 10 GDUs or less than 12 hours, then I know we've got a good start. And then after that, it's just fixing the kernel size. The weight, it's harder to do on weight for me because of the higher temperatures at nighttime. It's just when we've had those events. The other thing about 1197 YHR for us is, we don't have the insect spectrum, but we really struggle with the early season plant health. So we have to focus on making sure it just stays healthy because of that pythium I mentioned too. And it's not just 1197, but it seems like if we get a cool, wet spell early when the corn's about this tall, then I struggle. Outside of that, it is truly a racehorse hybrid. I don't plant it on moderate soil. It's only on irrigated and good management areas because we know it likes fertility. We know that we have to side dress it. It's not one that you just blow all the fertilizer out and hope. If you spoon feed it, for me, late in the season, that's when we can get that length and then we can fix those heavier ears. Outside of that, you better make sure it stays disease free, because if it starts getting any disease pressure, the yield is going to start going downhill pretty quick. So I know Pioneer's got something that's going to do better, Carl, but I haven't seen it yet.
David, that's my hope as well. That will make my job much easier. So thanks a lot for that. And thanks for your positivity with regards to it. That brings me to the end of the questions that the farmers compiled and the answers that I wrote down from my little knowledge that I have in our area. I think I want to hand over to Germa here for the questions that the guys put up on the chat. If you can maybe just quickly handle them, Germa. But from my side, I just want to thank David. I was really on my nerves speaking to him. It's like speaking to the Queen of England for me. So I have a new idol, and I certainly will look at this recording again. Luckily, Germa recorded it because I think my head is zooming at this stage. But there's a lot that we can learn. And I want to thank you, David. If ever you come to South Africa, you must come to my house. I will buy you a big steak. Yeah, thank you so much.
I think isn't that part of the deal? At some point in time, I get to come to South Africa.
Yes, that's part of the deal. As soon as we can travel for COVID, we will bring David over, and then all the guests can speak to him personally. Yep. David, we have received a question from Pierre, but I went through it and I think it was addressed. Pierre, please correct me if I'm wrong. And then we've received one from Job. He said, what growth regulator are you referring to? And what growth stage and rate do you apply it?
Okay. Well, we use the growth regulators, the plant growth regulators that we use is the cytokinetics, the IBAs, and then there's a gibberellic acid one. The cytokinetics and the IBAs, you can use them throughout the season. Nutrien is a supplier of ours, and they have a product called Radiate, which has got the cytokinetics and the IBAs in it. The gibberellic acid, that's one you can use early when it's really vegetatively growing early, when the corn's germinating. And then when you start getting to that V10 stage, that's when I pull the gibberellic acid PGR out. Reason being, if y'all have ever sprayed 2,4-D or dicamba, doesn't it make the plant grow curvature? Well, the gibberellic acid for us on some hybrids, some years, will make the ear shank fall over. The ear won't slip out, but the shank is going to grow over, and then the ear's not setting up anymore. Even when it's hadn't even pollinated, it may be tipped down. So we pull the gibberellic acid out. Then we start, I use a lot of humic acid and fulvic acid. Now that's not as much a PGR, but that's feeding the biology. Then we play with some amino acids. I like amino acids later in the season. We like to do that to help fill the kernel weight. None of this is shortening the plant. Now, if y'all grow, if y'all produce soy, you can spray those things and it won't shorten the plant out, but it won't let it grow as tall. The key is low rates multiple times. So that product I mentioned called Radiate, that's 2 ounces to the acre. And we'll do that 8-10 times a season, from planting all the way till harvest. And so low rates multiple times. That's the best. All right.
That's a key thing that I've heard today. And then Paul Collett asked, never weed and feed. What about feeding micros close to glyphosate application? Yeah.
Okay. That's from Paul, right? Yeah, I don't like to weed and feed, because here I'm trying to kill something and then we're spraying something that might help it stay alive. Particularly like if we're doing iron and molybdenum and we make a glyphosate spray in our soybeans, both of them mix well, but the weeds oftentimes don't want to die because we've just helped them out. Now, if you want to get your plant balanced, what you need to do is spray your micronutrients before you make your glyphosate spray, because the plant's got to metabolize that glyphosate. So we spray before. That's why I say we do it at the V3 stage, sometimes V4, and then we'll turn around and spray our glyphosate about 3 days after we make the micronutrient package. So it gives the plant time to absorb those micronutrients, and then when we spray the glyphosate, it's like the plant's not even worried about it then. if you've ever had soy and you spray glyphosate, you'll see a yellow flash, and they call that manganese, MN. Some people like to add manganese to the glyphosate. Ideally, you want to spray the manganese before. So micronutrients before you do the glyphosate spray. Don't, if you do it after, now you're just influencing it, but you didn't help the plant metabolize it. So.
And then we've got one from Conrad. What is your seed size and shape preference to achieve emergence, even emergence?
That's a good question, because I've said we want to have all their corn come up at the same time, right? And if we're going to do that, and then we're planting, now Carl, don't fuss at me. If we're planting PDFs or PDRs, there's multiple seed sizes in that bag. I get F14s. I mean, we used to plant the R23s, the large rounds. What you really, Conrad, what you really want to do is get the seed that your planter plants the best. So it doesn't matter what my planter plants the best, it's what your planter plants the best. So if your planter likes medium flats, get a medium flat. If your planter likes large rounds, get a large round. Try to get them to give you the most uniform seed size you can get. We can get F14s, we can get R23s. I don't know what's available over your way, but try to get it graded as tight as you can. Because we have, I mean, I've documented different seed sizes come up, they absorb water differently, they germinate a little differently. So here we're trying to get most uniform emergence, and then we may have some seed that's not the same size. So I'm already apologized to the Pioneer folks. And they used to do that. Any of the guys, I've been around a little bit longer. I don't know what the average age is over there, but I'm 58 years old. So I remember those plate planters. We started out, when I first started farming with my dad, we had some plate planters and the seed was all graded. Now we got these finger meters, and we can plant plateless seed that's got different seed size, but that comes with a penalty. So we've even taken seed, dumped it out of the bag, ran it across a gravity table to separate the seed based on density. And oftentimes that will separate it based on size. And then we plant it all, we just put it in different hoppers. So I just want all my seed to come up at the same time.
David.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just want to say, yeah, I'm going to turn a hardball into an opportunity this side. If you know that your planter plants best with a certain seed size, just put in your order really early so that we can have your seed size. So please put in your order. I will make a plan to give you that seed size.
That's right.
We have just got two last questions, then we're going to leave you, David, so that you can go and farm. Dean asked, are you wide dropping your nitrogen?
Yeah, that is a great question. When we do the side dress nitrogen sulfur boron, the first application at that V5 to V6 or 7 stage, sometimes we wide drop, but most of the time we are not, because the sprayer's we have one sprayer and it's got to do a lot of applications, and it takes time to take that off. When we're doing the corn that's at that V10 or V12 stage where it's, much taller, we are wide dropping then. And we're able to get that 100 to 160 pounds out. We do that with the nitrogen, the sulfur, the boron, and then we turn around and do it again with the potassium. I don't put them all together because the potassium, we take 0062, dissolve it in water, and we make it's a 10% potassium blend. If we add it with a bunch of nitrogen, then it sometimes wants to precipitate out and salt out, and then we have a problem. So I just do potassium by itself. Now, I'm gonna give you a hint though. When you're making your liquid potassium applications, add humic acid with that. That's going to allow the plant to absorb it faster, and it's a salt. We're killing the biology where you do that, but if you add the humic acid, that's going to stimulate it back again, and it's going to allow for a better uptake of your potassium. And that's in a Y drop. Do not go spray 0010. Now we do use that through our irrigators, that 0010. And if you're going to do that, add humic acid. That'll be my one little hint on that one.
Thanks, David. And then just one quick last one from Mani beside a note. Is it better to move away from glyphosate sprays if possible, also on soy, or will you still recommend it?
Yeah, I don't have as much problem with the glyphosate from a standpoint. We have non-GMO corn, we have non-GMO soy as well. And we don't see a big yield thing there. If I were to steer you away from a herbicide, watch your group 15s, like your Cetaclors, I don't know what name brands y'all have, but the group 15s, if you ever look at your leaf and you see it wrinkled in the mid part of the veins, let's say your leaf is this wide. There, let me try to. If this is your corn leaf and we got our midrib right here, our midrib and our corn, and you see it wrinkled all in here, that is oftentimes a function of that group 15 herbicide. And so what you got to watch out for is just do not make that spray too late in the season. Be sure if you're going to add those group 15 herbicides, make sure you spray them before V5. But that would be the one chemical I'd want to stay away from if I could. I don't know if y'all have glyphosate problems over there. We do. So we need that group 15, but if there are options to get away from it, I would stay away from that.
Okay, David. And Paul, just one last one,
Sure.
one last one. He just
Okay.
said, please ask what depth he measured temperature at when planting.
Okay. Yeah, the rule of thumb is 2 inches. I don't measure soil temperatures anymore. We look at a warming trend, and we look at how many GDUs are we going to collect in the next 5 days. If it's a strong vigor hybrid, we'll go by with between 30 and 40 GDUs in the next 5 days on a warming trend. If it's a weak vigor hybrid, then we want 50 to 60 GDUs in the next 5 days. So checking soil temperatures, I don't do it anymore, just because we know we're planting on warming trends, and I'm going to stop planting. If conditions are bad, we will stop planting. And we talked about 55-degree soil temperatures. That's just because that's what my smart depth tells me when we're planting, the smart firmer. But other than that, I don't check it anymore. We're just planting based on growing temperatures in the next 5 days.
David, thank you very much. From all of us in South Africa, it has been amazing talking to you. And I can see that people just want to ask more questions. But as soon as we can travel, we are going to bring you to South Africa. And then we're going to get all these farmers together so that they can speak to you personally to see how can we really make this P119 tick in South Africa. So really, thank you very much from our side for spending time with us. We will translate all of this and send it off to our farmers. So also to the farmers, if there's more questions, please do reach out. I know David will be more than willing to answer them and share his knowledge. David, enjoy your day. Thank you very much, and God bless on your side.
Yeah, let's everybody be sure we're safe. And just like she said, at some point in time, there's one appointment we're going to meet Let's make sure we're right with the good Lord, and let's just talk to him. And I'm looking forward to that day when I get a chance to come back to South Africa and visit with some folks I visited years ago, and maybe some new friends. So y'all be safe.
For sure. Thank you, David. You too. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.